I'm Steve Smith. Welcome to the Lucky or Good podcast. Our podcast invites reflection and dialogue following outdoor and experiential education incidents. Why do we normally succeed and sometimes fail? What can we learn from our successes, our near misses, and our incidents? Through non-judgmental analysis, we uncover lessons to build a safer future for our community. Rather than blaming and shaming, we try to see things from our guest's perspective, asking different questions. How did this happen? What went well? How did your actions make sense to you at the time? And what can we learn from this for our future? We invite our listeners to imagine themselves and our guest's situation and to explore the sometimes fine line between lucky and good. I'm very excited to welcome today's guest, Tamara Walker, not only one of my favorite climbing partners, but also my actual partner in the rest of my life as well. Tamara, we're going to jump straight into the story that you came here to share. We're going to spend about 5 minutes or so understanding what happened and then hear your thoughts on your analysis. What can we learn from it and whether you were lucky or good? So over to you.
Yeah, it's really interesting when you asked me about an incident that I might want to share for this discussion. And this was not the first thing that came to mind. So I have a few others that I often talk about. So it took a little bit to get to this one, but when I found it, I could really, really feel it in my body, which is why I'm bringing it forward here. It's the story of four of us, you and me and my father and a friend of ours, going up to Colchuck Lake and climbing up Colchuck Peak. And that was a place that we'd been a bunch of times, you and I. And this was a really exciting thing to take my dad to do. But it was late season and we went up and we arrived at the base and realized that the conditions were very, very different from what we were expecting. And also, the rope that we had ended up being 30-meter rope, and that was also not what we expected. So this set up this situation where four of us decided that we just wanted to have some fun, climb as far as we could, thinking that maybe the iciest parts that we could see that were surprising to us weren't going to be that far. And we started up. But pretty quickly, it became clear that with our incredibly short rope that we were using, 30 meters, we were going to have a real challenge getting down. And so, yeah.
And for our listeners, how were the conditions different than what you were expecting?
Yeah, we've been up there a lot where you could just walk up Colchuck Peak. So, a little snow, sort of steeper snow slopes, but really snow. And we instead encountered ice, true ice. And it was steeper, totally melted out, a section of blue ice. And you and I both had experience ice climbing, and I think our other partner also did, but my father had done very little. Yeah, he was a mountaineer, but that like true ice climbing was new to him. And so that was unexpected.
And how did we end up with a 30-meter rope?
Yeah, well, we asked our friend to bring the rope and he grabbed one that he didn't realize was 30 meters. And so that was in sharing gear. You bring this, we bring that. And another part of the gear story is that we lent my ice axe, my Gravel True ice axe to my father. And I had a lightweight aluminum, sort of more like hiking ice axe, which was the one that I was using. That did end up being important in the story too. Yeah. Yeah. So we have realized that, okay, it's gonna take us some time to get down from where we are, even though it was pretty quick to get to the spot we were at. We were still on ice. We were still fully reliant on our gear. We had everybody on ropes. And I had this idea that maybe we weren't very far from getting through the ice section. Like we kept expecting that it was going to level out. We were going to get on snow. We could start walking. And I just thought, well, I'm just going to go up ahead of everyone, come off the rope, scramble up and just see like how much further this kind of climbing is. And I did that and went up probably about 200, maybe 300 feet and realized that there was no, it was not going to happen soon. I did not reach better terrain. There was no evidence that we were going to get to that place that we were imagining anytime soon. So I turned around and I was up there with our friend, and both of us were like, oh, yeah, okay, no, this isn't going to work. We both turn around and suddenly realize that going down is going to be completely different from coming up. And both of us together checked in, like realizing, I'm so glad we turned around now, and getting back is going to be challenging. And each of us kind of went into our own place. And for me, there was a moment of absolute terror, like turning around, not having a proper ice axe to arrest given the conditions, and that understanding that if I slipped, I was almost certainly going to die was like, that was a moment of terror for me.
So at this point in the story, I'm down below, belaying your father up some of the lower angle beginning part of the ice. You and Scott have come off of the belayed system and have soloed up as far as you wanted to, hundreds of feet up above us. And we're now down climbing this moderately steep ice with equipment that wasn't ideal for the circumstances that you found yourself in. It was quite easy to go up, but much more challenging and exposed and difficult to down climb that ice with the equipment that you had.
Yeah, for sure. That had not really crossed my mind about how difficult it would be to go down.
Hmm.
And that feeling of, tipping forward and facing down. Then on top of that, the recognition of how difficult it would be to arrest myself if I did slip, if my crampons like came out from under me. And then the feeling of if I fell, it was going to be a long way down. Was I felt like I was going to die doing that or be very
Mm.
badly injured.
So how did you manage that situation?
Yeah, I had some, technical rock climbing experience where I had really understood the problem of fear. And under those circumstances, I wasn't really going to die. I just get scared. I would just get scared. I get above my gear and just feel like, oh my God, this is terrifying. And if I fell on it, I wasn't going to die. And here I used some of that to basically say, I cannot feel afraid. Fear is not going to be part of this experience because if I get afraid, I'm going to really increase the chances that I fall. And I really had that conversation in my head about fear and recognizing that one, I was terrified, and two, I didn't feel like I had a lot of options. I didn't know how far it was going to be if I continued climbing up. And then communication with my partners below. Scott was already descending. He didn't seem to be having the same challenges I did, or I didn't know. And so I didn't feel like I had a lot of options. I just chose to basically say, fear is not here. And I really feel like I just took something and pushed that to the side and just focused on being steady on my feet one step at a time, all skills that I'd actually done climbing, especially on slab climbing when you're just, okay,
Hmm.
you're just gonna do this. So I do feel like there was skills that came to play, but yeah, that's what happened.
Here's a different question. At this point in your life, you were also a surgeon, a veterinary surgeon, and in that role, probably frequently encountering time sensitive, challenging, emotionally charged, maybe not life or death for you, but potentially life and death for your clients. And I'm wondering if, you tapped into any of that sort of experience in setting aside or compartmentalizing the fear so that you could stay intellectually focused on the steps that needed to occur. I'm wondering if that might have been part of the story for you.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. There was a point in surgery when I was fairly new at it where I did something that created a high risk situation for a dog.
Hmm.
And I just started to feel myself, just partly because I felt responsible and just the terror of having done, I nicked a big artery, and having a moment of like taking a breath and just saying, I am not going to die,
Hmm.
recognizing like that really getting in my head in an intellectual way and having to control the fear to be effective at repairing, which I was able to do in that case because I really did get what fear can do in terms of how you respond, and that it gets in the way of an appropriate response or creates more problems if you can't manage it. So it was different in that it was my own death that I was dealing with, but the skill of just shutting down fear, I think, was trained in multiple ways in me. Yeah, I think I just want to add how meaningful it was to be there with my dad. We'd done a little bit of climbing when I was younger, and then through the years, we lived really far apart. He lives in Africa, and our opportunities to do this kind of thing together were really limited. And this was a really, really special event, and that I had spent a lot of time focused on him, making sure he was having a good experience, that he was safe.
Mm,
And so I think that that part of it is in part how I got sort of confused about what the danger was or where we really
hmm,
were. And I was thinking a lot more about the group than I was about me.
hmm.
And so I think that's part of the story too.
Yeah. Well, I think you just very seamlessly transitioned from the story to a little bit of the reflection and the analysis of some of the factors or the forces or the pressures that you might have been experiencing that influenced you. So let's keep going with that. Is there anything more you want to think about in terms of how your dad's presence there might have created something new or different or uniquely challenging for you or distracting for you? What would you like to? Let's keep unpacking that.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of the group, that was a little, it affected what we chose to do in that you and I had been in that place many times before. We had our first date up there, actually,
Hmm.
and had done some big climbs up there and climbed Colchuck Peak multiple times with different people. And so there would have been no reason to climb at this time if we got there and it was like conditions that were unexpected, a rope that was short. We would have just said, well, it's beautiful up here, let's just walk around the lake, or let's go up Asgard Pass, or do something different.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
because of who we were there with and this feeling of, oh, we really want to do this. And it was also not, we weren't trying to summit in a sense. Like we didn't have a goal other at recognizing, okay, we don't have everything that we normally would for this, or this isn't the ideal situation. So we'll just go up and have fun. I think that might have confused us a bit also, like making us think, oh, we can turn around whenever we want. We don't have a goal. And so that feeling of being more in control than maybe we were and making a decision to do something that we wouldn't under other circumstances, I think they both played into getting ourselves into a situation that ultimately for the group, I don't think was ever anything more than tedious, because coming down on that short rope ended up being a lot of pitches and just took a long time. But we made a good decision when to turn around, and
Hmm.
it just was tedious. But that experience of like absolute terror that I felt also, I couldn't process it when I got back to the group because
Hmm.
we were focused on getting down. Also, that relationship, of course, between my father and me, where his experience would normally be to take care of me and not wanting to make him more frightened or to create any other elements of surprise in what was happening. Think that that was part of the experience for me, and maybe why it's still sticking around. Because as I was saying, telling this story, like, I don't know how much worse it would have been than some of the big domes I might have slipped on when I was slab climbing. There have been plenty of places I've been where a fall would have been really bad.
Hmm.
But this one has stuck with me
Hmm.
in a way that some of those other ones didn't. And maybe it was because it was just different. Maybe it was because of who was there. I'm not sure, but there's something about this that's different.
Hmm. Okay. I've heard you mention a few things that I wanted to kind of circle back to and just name them for us and for our listeners, if that's okay. And one of the strategies that you were using when you were trying to compartmentalize was really tapping into brain physiology. and getting back upshifting from your scared limbic system that was having this survival fight or flight kind of moment back into your prefrontal cortex, which is the part of our brains that's uniquely adapted for decision making and strategy and intellect and not just fear. And so I think that was a really effective thing that you did. Maybe that you had learned some of those pathways and some of those strategies from your previous climbing experiences, your surgery job, and stuff like that. So that was one thing I was hearing in that part of the story. And I wonder if that resonates with you and if that makes sense.
Yeah, it really does. And there's a couple things to add in there. One being I was really aware that part of my fear response, and it might even happen when I'm talking in front of people, is to
Mm,
shake
mm,
and like really shake. And so that obviously is a problem in surgery. And I didn't drink coffee the whole time I was a surgeon. And managing shaking was a thing that I was aware of, like how I couldn't actually, you can't really stop yourself from shaking when you're scared. The only way to stop yourself from shaking is to not be scared. And so I think that is part of it. I also, as a training therapist, understanding that when you have a fear response that you don't allow to happen, like if you basically dissociate, go somewhere else, or force it to your cognitive brain, or there's like some way that you're not experiencing it at the level that it's happening, even though it's still an experience, that ends up being an experience of trauma. Like there's a trauma in your body from that that then needs to be processed or should be processed or is benefited from being processed. And I think that in this case, you know, if I was climbing a dome and I was on a slab and I was really terrified and I made it, I can really imagine the feeling of elation at the top, the conversation with friends going, I was so scared and I did this. And, you know, like really being able to share that experience with other climbers and celebrating it and feeling the fear and all of it all together. Whereas in this particular situation, it was an extended time that we needed to get down, get back to the car. My father was there the whole time. I didn't want to process my fear with him. And so there was a way that that maybe never got talked about
mhm.
in the same way that some of my other experiences have.
Yeah, it's so interesting those dynamics, and you didn't it's like you were continuing to compartmentalize that fear and keep it put away and keep it hidden, if you will, so that we could make 5 or 6 rappels that we needed to do finding and building anchors on the ice along the way. So that's interesting that you suppressed that, but it stayed hidden for you. And it sounds like it's still sort of present in a way. So maybe it's really good that we're talking about it now.
Yeah, and, you know, talking about it because now I've been thinking about it for a few days and more clearly and talking about it, and it's always I find that there's, like, another layer that comes in after you start to think about it, and the thing that comes in now as we're talking is the trauma history of my family, and that there has been like there was an event in my family that was really really traumatic that would have influenced my capacity to talk to my father about what was happening
Mm,
and the care for each other. And also, it was a car accident. My brother was killed, which you know about this. And that I'm just all of a sudden realizing through talking about this that the multiple layers of thinking, oh my God, to my mother who was at home waiting for us to come back. The
mm,
idea that we have been in sort of a scary place, the idea that I didn't want anything to happen to my dad on my watch in a sense, or and he would feel the same way about me. So
mm,
that I actually think that this brings in a whole other layer that's interesting to think about in risk management also around this, like we all bring our own stuff to the situation and that gets layered into how we might experience it in our bodies or experience it at the time. And so I think another reason it's maybe stuck around is just because of that having got set up there.
and if I could add to that, it's not like Colchuck Lake in that area has been without its own history and trauma for me as well. It's really remarkable, the convergence of different near misses and experiences. And I'm referring to a glissading incident that I had in that exact same basin earlier than the day with you. And I'll drop some information about that in the show notes. But yeah, we carry our own previous existing relationships to place and to trauma into these complex situations. And, there are other factors as well that are exerting their pressures and influences on us as we try to navigate our way through these situations. One of those sets of common influences is what researchers have called heuristics or mental shortcuts. And I heard several. I think I heard about three that were in the story that you told. And the ones I'll name, and maybe we could just explore them briefly, would be something called the familiarity bias, a consistency bias, and a scarcity bias. So, familiarity is when you're really familiar with a place and you're seeing it for what you remember it to be instead of for what is actually right in front of you in that moment. And of course, you and I went up to Colchuck expecting to find the sort of easy glacier travel conditions that we were imagining, not the ones that we encountered, right? So that's an interesting one. Consistency is when you stick to your plan and you stick to your goal, regardless of differing information or changing circumstances or conditions. And we're going to keep climbing, no matter what. And then scarcity is a really interesting one in light of your father being there. And you kind of started to talk about this, which is the idea that this is our one chance. It's a scarce opportunity. This is our one chance to summit and climb Colchuck Peak with your dad, and that is a powerful factor that influences us to keep going. So I wonder if you want to talk about any of those three different heuristics: familiarity, consistency, and scarcity.
Yeah, I think you nail it. Those three feel really true in this situation. And the scarcity piece is maybe the most influential in a sense
Hmm.
of like,
Hmm.
I'm also, I mean, I hate bringing in more and more trauma here, but um, I had an event happen in my early 20s where my father and I attempted to climb a peak in Canada and really misjudged how far it was going to be. My mom was waiting in the campground down below, and we actually had to crawl up the backside of the mountain in the night to get off. And while that happened,
And why were you crawl?
yeah, we were off trail. So we summited and had to go down the backside of a mountain that it was really, really cold. And the decision was made that to sleep overnight was going to be was going to be really difficult. We didn't have any water. And we also had our my mother waiting in the campground, and she had sent out search and rescue after us,
Hmm.
and they didn't find us. Um, yeah, so I mean, there's a lot in that story that is also micro in this story. So this feeling of needing to get back, the feeling of scarcity, the feeling of not wanting to have an event, like really, really afraid of having an event,
Hmm.
much more than just for myself,
Hmm.
and I
Hmm.
think about maybe that's part of the fear that I felt of just, like, the
Hmm.
weight, and also knowing your story of Asgard Pass up there. I think that was all in this. I think that, yeah, those 3 points seem really, really highly relevant.
And I think especially you were crawling down that mountain because you didn't have headlamps, right? And you had to be feeling your way ahead of you because you couldn't see. That's kind of where I was going with that question. So, but that's interesting that you can. That's interesting that you. It's interesting that you can connect some of those different pieces, and the common factor in some of those different stories is, really being influenced by your awareness of the group and of managing something bigger than your own immediate safety in the moment. Managing someone else's experience, managing someone else's emotions, managing how an event might look instead of how it actually is, things like this, right? So I think that's really interesting. You know, uh, Group dynamics pieces to bigger than group. It's like not just the group, but it's the optics. How does this appear to the search and rescue team, to the rest of the family, to my mom who's waiting for us? And how does that affect people's decisions in the moment.
Yeah, it's funny you bring up the headlamps and all the things, all the ways we weren't prepared, and how actually core that experience was to who I was later in the mountains. Like, I
Mm.
wouldn't go on a two-pitch climb without um, a down jacket, and a headlamp. And so that I am now seeing and feeling how the thread between that event, which was another like fundamental event for me as a climber, which was years before I met you. And I was totally dependent on my father and his experience and choices back then. And to be now in the reverse situation, and how many threads maybe added to my sense of terror. Like, as I tell the story, I think, "Oh, well, maybe I wasn't that much at risk, like
Mm.
maybe the sense of terror had
Mm.
a lot more to do with all the other factors than my active or my accurate assessment of what was likely to happen." And so that's really a really important, I think, learning from this for me.
If you could go back in time with this gift of hindsight from today and look back at yourself in that moment, hundreds of feet up above us on the ice, is there any advice you would want to give to whisper to that version of yourself out there?
I think one of the biggest challenges for me in the mountains has always been assessing accurately assessing the subjectivity versus the objectivity of risk, and that I got better as I got more experienced, but that I think that the moment of choice was really at that moment when I decided to scramble up. I don't feel like there were a lot of other choices I could make. When I turned around, I think that was the best decision in that moment.
Hmm.
But that to get how risk might suddenly come upon one's like when you're not involved in like lots of other things, or you're not really recognizing, or you're goal focused or something, and somehow you've not really been able to understand the situation you're in and what it means to just unclip like 3 pitches up or whatever from an anchor, just because I felt like what I was more experienced, that the terrain was familiar, and where the group might have also helped. The other person who went up with me, he was not a person I'd climbed with before. I don't know how the group made the decision for the two of us to go up ahead. That's all really fuzzy, but I think that what I feel in this moment is how a big step like that for somebody to decide to leave the group and go and
Hmm.
recon something in terrain like that really wasn't made as intentionally as it should have been.
I think that's a really interesting point that you bring up. It leads me to recognize another potential heuristic that was at play here, which is called social facilitation. And it's the idea that we're more likely to take risks or make riskier decisions when we're in the company of other people or other parties nearby that we're seeing doing so. And so if this wasn't safe, I'm sure someone else would speak up. Or if this wasn't a good idea, so that kind of like lure that lures you in to maybe take shortcuts. Heuristics are an interesting thing because for the most part, they help us. They help us make quick and normally really effective decisions in complex situations and helps us be efficient. But in these high consequence environments, over reliance on heuristics and shortcuts like this can sometimes lead us to make riskier decisions than we would want to. Just an interesting observation there. So, for our last little piece of analysis here, I'll just ask you the simple question: were you lucky or were you good?
Yeah, I think that there's elements of both in here. And I think there were moments when really good decisions were made when we decided to turn back. My decision to descend and not create actually more problems,
Hmm.
and how I managed that. I'm proud of that. And I think that that did have to do with a lot of experience, assessing very quickly what the whole situation looked like and what felt like what needed to happen. And the lucky is that nothing happened, and that we weren't our best selves. We didn't make good decisions at particular decision making points. Things could have gone really differently. And so there's, yeah, both.
Well, I'd like to thank you so much for being my guest today. And thanks to all of you for listening. Remember, despite the show's title, we can be lucky and good, but relying on luck is not an effective risk management strategy. In order to help us keep learning and growing, let's keep sharing our stories so that we can earn our luck. And if you'd like to be a guest on our show, please check the show notes and learn more about how to be a guest at luckyOrGoodPodcast.com. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.